then yeah, I thought, what would be an interesting topic? And I'm really interested in this idea of making your voice heard and how it's different at the moment with all the kind of hybrid working and the different opportunities from that, but also the challenges too. And so I've worked in communications all of my career, but it doesn't always mean that I've been good at it. You know, it's something that I've developed a skill for over the years, and I'm still not perfect. In fact, Jordan, I was telling you about a bloke that was completely speaking over me at a networking event last night. And I was thinking, hang on, I'm about to go and talk to a load of people about this tomorrow night and give them tips. And I was thinking, yeah, this is still happening. But there's all sorts of techniques that we can develop that not only help ourselves talk more confidently and make our voices heard, but also in the spirit of women supporting women, how we can help amplify other people's voices as well. So first of all, I'm going to set the scene with a bit of context and then run through some tips for leaders and tips for ourselves. And then we're going to have a really good discussion and hopefully come away with some exciting new approaches. And then if there's people watching on Facebook as well, then, you know, put in questions as we go, and then we can tackle it afterwards. And hopefully you could come and join us on Zoom as well, which would be lovely. So look me up on LinkedIn as well. You can connect on there. And then on social media, we're all over the place, quite literally half the time, at Sukio, so SWOKIO. So to give you a few sort of moments of my personal background, so just to take you back to when I was project manager for ITV.com. So I'd gone from working in this quite a large shed, but still a shed, in my boss's back garden in a Cambridgeshire village. So I was working for a small radio production company where I was heavily involved in live events and the production process itself. But for any big meetings with BBC bigwigs, then my bosses would go to London on their own. So I wasn't really getting that sort of experience in meetings and nuances around meetings. And then, so I landed in ITV as project manager, and I was in the large building, I don't know if anybody knows it, on Gray's Inn Road in London. And this is the business side of ITV. So it's where you get the heads of sport, the heads of drama. You've got Channel 4 on the floor below. You've got ITN in the basement pushing out all the amazing news output. And this huge sort of glass auditorium, you know, when I went in the morning, I used to walk past Jon Snow and get in the lift with Sir Trevor McDonald, you know, pretty like, wow, it's exciting. But it was quite a leap from where I was before in this very rural village. And I remember on my first day in my first meeting, just sitting in this huge glass office, looking out over this huge auditorium and just really thinking, oh God, this is on a slightly larger scale than I'm used to, even though I was quite used to broadcast media and that sort of world, but everything seemed a lot bigger. And you start to feel a little bit intimidated, you know, so I'd sit around a table with the heads of ITV, heads of ITV2, head of drama and sport, and quite conscious that they're all a lot more experienced than me and a lot more senior as well. And then I don't know if about anyone else, but you find if you don't say anything at the start of the meeting, then you sit there thinking, oh God, well, it's too late now. It's too late. I haven't said anything. Or you might think, okay, I've got a really solid point that I'm going to make. So I'll say it in a second. And yeah, I'll say it any second now. But then you're too nervous to speak up. And then you find that someone else gets there before you. And then you don't want to be saying, yeah, but I was going to make that point. You know, it's too late. And then you get this inner monologue starting up saying, oh, well, you haven't really got anything important to say. And these people are much more important than you, and they know what they're talking about. And then the other thing as well, some of you might find this as well, that if you leave it too late, then it gets to 40 minutes into a meeting and you think, well, if I speak now, my voice is going to come out all weird and squeaky. So then you end up kind of getting to the whole thing thinking, oh, well, I haven't said anything at all now. This is awful. But then thinking back to prior to the ITV experience, it wasn't just official meetings where I was holding back from making my voice heard. And I'm quite interested in the idea that we do this to ourselves. You know, it's not always people stopping us. And so when I was working in radio, and it was such an amazing job working in this production company, making specialist music programs, Radio 2, and it was all folk music, it was country, it was soul. We'd do a Dusty Springfield documentary. We'd do a series traveling the route of Route 66 or A Night from Rio, that kind of thing. And the two partners in the business, they're very experienced. They were really fun, very supportive, very personable, and just brilliant, you know, just really, really talented. So the quality levels were just sky high. And so they'd come up with ideas for programs just all the time. Or sometimes they'd come up with an idea for a really good title for a program and then kind of work backwards from there. There was one, I remember my boss saying, where there's a hit, there's a writ. And, oh, okay. Oh, we could do a program on people that get sued for copyright fraud in music. Okay, right, great, let's make it. And so I was really into music myself. So we used to go out at the weekend DJing, lots of hard house and techno. I was very much into alternative music like The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, Sisters of Mercy, all that sort of thing. This record label 4AD, you've got the Pixies and the Cocteau Twins. So I'd sit there coming up with ideas for programs, but then I was a bit too shy about putting it forward. So I was lacking that confidence in making my voice heard, even though it was such a warm and supportive environment. So I'd feel that I needed to have this really kind of rock solid, watertight outline, or there's no way that anybody would want to put it forward. And so I think, and like a lot of people, you know, you have this inner voice telling you this, even though the people around you would probably really welcome it. And I think about my company now. So there's 9 of us. I run a digital marketing agency in Cambridge, and we really welcome input from the younger members of the team, particularly working in social media where things are moving so quickly. You know, you want someone in the room that is on, well, you don't want them to be on TikTok all day, but you want them to understand it and all the trends and the dance moves and you know, the popular music soundtracks that everyone's using. So, you know, you really welcome it. And I know that there were times when ideas were put forward. So I suggested once, I don't know if anyone, you must know 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton. There's a typewriter at the beginning. And so I suggested that we use that as the opening to the news each week on the country show. And my boss really loved that, you know, so why did I put more ideas forward? And I think it's this idea that we quite often hold ourselves back. So in a way, we're our own worst enemy. And so nowadays I'm a lot more confident. So, you know, sitting here talking to you lot for starters. And so I've spoken at lots of events over the pandemic. We've done at least 2 webinars or training workshops a month. And then because I run my own business, then I'm always in situations where there's no chance really, sorry, no choice except to just step up and lead. So you can't sit around saying, oh, I don't know if it's my turn to speak. You've just got to get on with it and make decisions and be decisive and make your voice heard. So now that I feel a bit more kind of confident in this position, then I'm really interested in making sure that other people can make their voices heard and that we enable others to do it as well, because it's good for business, it's good for society, you know, rather than having one, you know, smaller groups of society getting all the, well, making all the noise and being really dominant and getting all the attention. So that was a little bit about context and my own background. So thinking about the current situation. So the interesting thing that I think is that the playing field has leveled quite a lot. So I felt this very strongly when social media first came on the scene. So somewhere like The Guardian, which, you know, my background, BBC, ITV, AOL, Yahoo, I was working in these sorts of organizations, and somewhere like The Guardian, I would have really wanted to have worked. But to get there, I would have had to write letters, go through a formal application process, all of that sort of stuff. And then social media came along, and all of a sudden I could just connect with the editor of The Guardian. You know, and I was thinking, this is interesting. You know, there's these new routes to connecting with people. And so as a freelancer, when I was connecting on LinkedIn, then that enabled me to stay visible long after contracts had ended. So it wasn't a case of having to pick up the phone and say, oh, hello, you know, do you remember me? We used to work together 6 months ago. So have you got any work? I was able to make these connections with people and still stay visible and show a bit of a human side. So a bit of wit, bit of humor, and keep that human connection going alongside the professional. So I found that really useful. And I've just built up this, you know, steady stream of LinkedIn contacts over the years. So I've got a really large network now. So that's very useful. And then fast forward to modern workplace communications, and we've got Slack, we've got WhatsApp groups. I must say my heart sinks anyone anytime someone says, can I add you to a WhatsApp group? But we've got all these messaging systems that allow us to stay visible all the time, rather than communication being ring fenced to one meeting with a month with your boss at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, where you say, oh, excuse me, can I come into your office and can I talk to you now? It's this kind of ongoing communication, which I think is a real opportunity. And so this was all in full swing before the pandemic, and then it really came into its own. And that moment when Boris told us to all pack up and work from home, I don't think any of us really realised at the time how long the situation was going to go on for. And if you did think at the time that it was going to go on for all this time, then it's quite a negative way of thinking. I was feeling very optimistic that it would all be over very soon. But what's happened is that in terms of communication, then these new ways of working and thinking have become really embedded. So it's not just social media, this sort of constant communication and hopping on Zoom has become this way of thinking and this way of working, which to my mind is offering a lot of people, and very often women, a whole new flexible way of working that means we could spend more time with our families, we're not spending so much time commuting. And for people that have got physical access needs, then it's removing all these boundaries. So as well as being able to work remotely, suddenly events are virtual as well as in person. And then you get captions on videos as well, making it easier to understand. And we've reached this point where it isn't just novelty, it's something that we all expect now. So it's fantastic, really good. But then the downside of this is that if you're not careful, then it's quite easy to become less visible. So Slack and WhatsApp groups, they can become quite noisy places sometimes. And sometimes some people can dominate the conversation and make others feel sidelined. So people can be a bit snappy, or you might write in a way that is quite blunt. I just remembered actually a conversation I had with someone, another business owner near the start of the pandemic, that said that on a Monday morning, someone had just come in and quit, just completely out of the blue, just didn't expect it. And it was all about a message that had been sent over Slack that was quite blunt, but this chap had misinterpreted it and stewed over it. And then he didn't have anyone else around him to kind of talk it through, and then convinced himself over the weekend that it was curtains for him. He needed to leave that company. And so there's, all this room for people to misinterpret what you're saying, or for you to phrase it in the wrong way, or for people to become dominant. And one thing I'm particularly conscious of is the impact on younger people. So I think it is really hard getting started in the workplace and understanding all of this etiquette and all these nuances. So it's not, you don't have the same opportunities to just be in the corridor with people. I have a particular thing about when you leave client meetings, that you don't discuss any of it until you're well out of earshot, preferably out of the building, out of, just on a train, just out of the place. Because even if you come out and you're saying, oh, that went well, it's still, you need to be out of earshot, and then you can have the debrief. And explaining things like that, there aren't so many opportunities for younger people, because they're becoming used to this idea that you just end a Zoom call and then that's that. And one thing that I found with people that I mentor that are a lot younger than me is that they worry that sometimes the only interaction that they're having with people is sometimes quite negative. So maybe they haven't understood instructions. So they might send someone a message, a colleague, to say, oh, sorry, can you run through that again? And so they feel like most of the interactions they have, they're either sitting there silently listening, or they're having to say, oh, sorry, I didn't quite get that. And oh, I've got a problem with this. And so the other thing as well is that sometimes if people aren't in such luxurious surroundings, there's lots of CEOs that are saying, brilliant, let's go 100% remote. And that's because they've got a lovely, comfortable house with, beautiful background, and the kids have grown up and left home and all of that. Whereas there's a lot of people in houses that they don't necessarily want to show on Zoom, and, noisy flatmates and all the rest of it. And so you quite often find that people have retreated further into the background, and they're avoiding the whole thing again altogether. So that means again that people are becoming less visible, and what was evening out, the leveling the playing field, means it's sort of, we're getting this uneven balance again, which is a bit of a challenge. So that means that the opportunities and benefits of hybrid working and modern day communications are sometimes being cancelled out by different people, either staying under the radar or becoming too dominant. And sometimes, particularly for younger people, they're not developing those essential skills in making their voices heard in the workplace. So that's some thoughts on where we are now. And I just want to run you through some tips. So firstly, looking at what leaders can do to communicate effectively. And to my mind, it's all about creating this environment where people can find their voice, know courage to speak openly. So I've got 8 tips for you here, and then I'll follow that with 5 tips that all of us can do to help ourselves and to help others. So the first thing that I try to do in meetings, in a workplace environment, is to invite others to speak and to do it early. So I'll introduce younger members of the team, and I'll get them to say something. So this gets over that thing that I was saying about a minute ago, where it gets to 40 minutes in and you think, oh, I can't say anything now. It'd be really weird when I suddenly pipe up. So, and I'll say something like, oh, this is our production assistant. She was really looking forward to meeting you today. She's, what did you make of the social media? And then invite her to speak in that way. And then I like to refer to them while it's happening and invite their opinions. So to say, oh yeah, so Sasha had some ideas about the designs. What was that thing that you mentioned earlier? So you're it's almost like in football, you're making that pass and then someone else knocks the ball in, rather than them carrying the weight of being the one that's speaking first. So I find that's very useful. I also try and create opportunities for communication that aren't just functional. So we've got a Zoom link that we just call daily. Doesn't take a lot of imagination, but we set it up at the start of the pandemic, 9 o'clock every day, hop on Zoom, have a little chat. And then that link is there running all the time. So if anyone wants to talk about other stuff during the day, any other meetings, sales things that pop up, because I'm really, keen on the idea that we want to practice communication as we go throughout the day. And it's not just purely functional about projects. I want to know what people have been up for the weekend. I'm worried about them if their partner is ill and or something's wrong with their kids. And, it's all about that daily communication and helping people build bonds and build up their confidence. And then it's so important to try and get offline as well. So face to face, and you've probably found this as well, it's so different when you talk face to face instead of online. And I've got a dog during the pandemic, got my little cockapoo. And so if anyone lives locally, then for our monthly one-to-ones, I try and go for a walk with them instead. So instead of this, just doing it over Zoom. And I find it quite hard myself if I've got something negative to say to people. I find it quite hard to do that over Zoom, and particularly because well, what's going to happen when you end the call? That person's going to be there feeling pretty bad about things. And that's one area of communication I've struggled with myself throughout the pandemic. So I try and engineer conversations that you can have in person if possible. And then the next thing, thinking about what leaders can do, is praising people publicly so that they know that you've got their back. So I talk about the team on LinkedIn, and I say, the other day, our video team was filming at the stock exchange, which is brilliant, fantastic. So I said on LinkedIn how proud I was of everybody. We'll share pictures of the team on social media. We've got an internal Slack channel called You Beauty. So whenever someone does something really good and helpful, then we post in there and say, oh, Gillian, thanks so much for all that research for that project. It went like a dream today. Or sometimes clients say, oh, that project went, it just started off so well, we're really pleased. So I'll take that email that's just come into me, and then I'll put it in the You Beauty channel, and then everyone can see that person's done really well. So it's all about enabling people to speak up at moments when there's no pressure on them to do it. So it's helping everybody practice, if you like. And then the fifth thing is about not closing down other people's ideas. So when you're a leader, you are quite used to looking for things that might go wrong. You're almost looking for flaws and thinking, oh, I don't know, better assess that risk. And that does mean that sometimes when other people who particularly are younger, when they come up with an idea, it's quite easy to kind of go in and say, oh, well, that won't work. Oh, we've tried that. We tried that 6 years ago when you weren't part of the company. And so this can be really damaging to people's confidence. So try and ask more questions instead of just saying flat out, oh, that will never work. So things like, oh, tell me how you came up with that idea, or what particular channel would that work on, or what made you think that would be effective? And then that helps you explore it a bit more. And you might find that the person then develops it into something that you do actually want them to do, rather than just flat out, oh, that will never work. Because it's really, sometimes you want to explore ideas and develop them and sort of play around with them. And, not everything is clear cut straight away. So try not to close down other people's ideas. That can be really, really, you sometimes have to force yourself not to do it. And then giving people opportunities to make their voice heard in different formats is useful as well. So some people on your team might be good writers. Perhaps they might want to write for the blog and build up a profile there. Or sometimes people are very visual and they might want to express themselves through your Instagram channel, for example. Sometimes people are more introverted. And so you don't want to fight against that. You know, you don't want to be saying to someone on, let's say, a Zoom call, but also in person, right, you never say anything, come and stand at the front and now do this presentation, because it can make people feel terrible. So it's good in this situation to really recognize that different people on your team have got different personalities and they'll work differently together. So with people that are a bit more introverted, if you can encourage them to work in pairs or in small groups, then that can be really effective for them, because not everybody wants to stand up in public and be, you know, really, willy waving. It's one of my favorite phrases, but they're not, you know, not everyone's got a massive ego. So, you know, you need to understand that to be a good leader, I think. And then sort of related to this as well is that one thing that can hold people back from speaking up is when they feel like they're the only one. So in terms of diversity, something that I see a lot, and I'm sure people, this will sound familiar as well, is when you get a company full of white people hiring one person with dark skin, and then they go, right, brilliant, that's the diversity box ticked. And then if it's a woman, even better, lovely. So they think, right, that's job done. But unless that person has other people around that are also maybe similar to him or her, then they're going to feel a bit isolated. And then this makes it harder sometimes to speak out, because you feel a kind of the weight of being the diversity person in the room. And in fact, I was saying this to this bloke last night who was, interestingly enough, at a networking event, really talking over me. And then he asked the bloke next to me about diversity. And I thought, that's interesting, because he's got a real life woman in front of him who might have an opinion on this. And he didn't ask me. It's really bizarre. So I said this to him. I said, can I give you a bit of advice? You know, if you are looking, he was talking about a board, like an advisory board. And I said, so if you are thinking about diversity, don't just hire one person who you see as being the diversity person. Make sure there's a lot of mix, you know. So you're thinking about age, you're thinking about sex, you're thinking about class, background, you know, it's not just the color of people's skin. There's a lot more to it than that. And then once you've got that mix in the company, then that is just one of these subtle things that enables lots of people to speak more openly. And I like to extend it beyond not just hiring. So you're thinking about who you are to speak at events, clients maybe that you work with. If you share book and film and TV recommendations internally, you know, what are you sharing? What are you encouraging other people to explore and understand in cultural terms? You know, what images are you using on your website? So I think when it comes to diversity, there's a lot more to it than that, you know. So think about the touch points in your business and ways that you can make people feel a bit less isolated on their own, which can affect confidence. I'm sure that we'll get lots of tips on this as well as we go to the discussion. And then the last thing for leaders is about nipping bad behavior in the bud. So I've been in workplace environments where you get a couple of very, very political people, and they can make other people feel uncomfortable and afraid to speak openly. And you need to really think about how their behavior might be affecting others. And one thing that I have learned over time is that in business, any difficult decisions don't get any easier the longer you put them off. And what actually happens when you've got a couple of people that are quite toxic like this is that the good ones will just quietly leave. They won't come to you and say, oh, you know, I feel really uncomfortable with this person talking about Brexit or Boris or, you know, whatever, the whole time. They'll just quietly leave and they'll go somewhere else. And then what you'll find is that the person who is quite toxic, well, they're quite comfortable and they're quite happy and they're able to express their views openly and they're making their voice heard. So they stay, you can't get rid of them. But you find that once you remove that toxic person out of that environment, everyone else kind of, you know, and the whole dynamic changes. So let me just run through those 8 tips. So in terms of what leaders can do to encourage others to speak up and make their voices heard, introducing others in meetings and inviting them to speak. Remember, not every piece of workplace communication has to be functional. You know, create other opportunities for people to exercise that communication muscle. Praising people publicly so they know that you've got their back, and create opportunities to communicate in person So not everything has to be online, you know, picking up the phone, even that is quite nice sometimes nowadays. We're so used to Zoom. Try not to close down other people's ideas, even though you've got more knowledge and experience, you know, ask them questions, let them open up. Try and give people different platforms to speak. So it could be blogging, could be visual, you know, not everybody wants to stand up and do a talk in public. Try and aim for diversity in the workplace and, you know, look beyond just skin tone, though that is of course important. You know, just think about all of your business touch points and any toxic behavior that could be affecting other people, making them hold back from speaking openly. Try and nip it in the bud. And so lastly, before we go to the discussion, so thinking about what you can do yourselves, you know, I was talking about how often we hold ourselves back. So I've got 5 tips on this one. So firstly, it's about being proactive. So the girl that I was mentoring who was saying that the only interactions that she had were about asking questions and saying, oh, sorry, I didn't quite get this. Since day one, she had worked remotely. So I suggested to her that she picks a day of the week that she goes into the office. So instead of waiting to be asked, she just says, right, I'm going in on Wednesday, and anyone else coming in on Wednesday. And so that would mean that she was there, she was visible, she was present, and she'd build up almost like a bank of communications with people, that people would get to know her as a person. So when you think about the ratio of numbers of interactions that she had with people, it might be that 1 out of 20 was her saying, oh, sorry, I don't quite get it, instead of that being 100%, or that's how it felt to her. And that was really helpful. And after that, it was a bit of a magnet. And then other people also thought, oh, I'll go in on a Wednesday as well. So, you know, being proactive instead of waiting for people to ask you is, you know, it's difficult, but it definitely helps. And the next thing that we can do is try and lead by example. So if the nature of workplace communications does feel a bit too political or too argumentative, or maybe people are always whinging on Slack or whatever your internal comms channels are, start by talking about something else. So if you start a channel or a forum about something that you've learned, that can be good, or swap tips. And you might realize there's a silent majority out there who don't want to get sucked into this negativity. And actually, they'd all really welcome positive communication. And it's something that I do myself and that we do on our social media channels. So we could quite easily, because we're copywriters and editors and digital marketing people, we could sit there all day saying, oh, look at that brand who's done a typo. Oh, look at their, you know, their awful gaffe. Oh, look at them. And I'm just not interested in it. You know, I'd much rather say, look at that brilliant tagline. You know, I walked past the Royal National Institute for the Blind the other day, and there, hadn't noticed it before, but their branding, it's see differently, the tagline. And I thought, that's brilliant. I really love that. So I shared that on social media. And then that generated this really interesting, positive discussion. And I'd much rather be there instead of, you know, in all the really sort of nasty, sniping political stuff, because there's tons of people out there doing that, and I'd rather, you know, spread a bit of joy in the world. Thank you very much. So yeah, leading by example. If the conversation is negative, try and counteract that with something positive. And then the next thing about what can help you find your voice and how you can support other people is about finding allies. And you find these in all sorts of different corners. So maybe you might find a colleague who's at the same level as you, and you can kind of find a good approach between yourselves. Maybe you could find someone a bit more senior and ask them to mentor you, or you might find little pockets, little communities. Yeah, so my background is as a copywriter. There's a hashtag Copywriters Unite, and there's lots of people using that on Twitter. It's on LinkedIn as well. You know, there's quite a strong kind of freelancer community out there that I'm sure lots of you are familiar with as well. So yeah, there's lots of pockets of people supporting each other out there. So that can help you feel less isolated. And then my second to last tip, but actually if you take away anything from this tonight, then it's about your inner monologue. So the phrase imposter syndrome drives me up the wall. So I see it all the time. People on LinkedIn spending all this time writing all these lengthy posts about how they've got imposter syndrome when they could be doing something more useful. And so for every person sitting there saying, I've got imposter syndrome, there's 20 idiots out there sharpening their elbows, zero talent, none of the talent that you've got. And they're all out there taking work away from you, getting positions that you should be taking. And it just drives me nuts, you know, so you've really got to stop it. And it's almost, I see these conversations on LinkedIn with just loads of people all encouraging, oh yeah, I've got imposter syndrome too. Oh, how about you? Yeah, I've got it. And it's terrible. We've got to stop doing it. We need to convince ourselves that we have got skills, we have got talent, we are worthy of being listened to, which is why when that guy was sort of talking over me last night, and I stood there thinking, hello, there's three of us in this conversation. Why are you doing all the talking? And that's when I thought, well, what advice would I give people tonight on this? And my advice would be to, you know, to stop feeling, I suppose, like the victim in the situation, slightly strong word, but, you know, stop convincing yourself that he's got this God-given right to dominate the conversation, and just pipe up and interrupt him, which is what I did. Anyway, I don't think it will really make too much difference to him, because I could see him doing it to everybody, but at least I felt like I'd fought back against it. And then, so the very last thing before we go to the discussion is about practicing and preparing. So the first time I had to speak at a conference, it was just me working from home before it was fashionable, quite a while ago. And I had two toddlers. So I wasn't having much verbal communication with people all day, apart from toddlers, you know, which is a slightly different form of communication. And so I was terrified, you know, like, what am I going to do when I stand up in front of all these people? So I got his cuddly toys and then lined them up on the back of the sofa and then practiced my talk to them. So I've got brilliant reception. They all look so happy, you know, but it was really useful. And then nowadays, if I'm speaking at an event, I practice in the car. And that's great because you can't look at your notes. You're not relying on tech, and you can make all, you know, you can fluff your lines all you want. And you just find that when you, like, I've got this written here that I've, you know, I mapped it all out. But when you write things down, it's so different to how you say it out loud. And you suddenly realize it's this terribly clever sentence actually is a real mouthful to say. So when you practice while you're driving, it's great, you know, and yeah, like I say, you can make all the errors you want. So the A10 from Ely to Cambridge has just heard all of my awful speaking gaffes, but it's, you know, it's not going to share any of my secrets. And so you might look at people that are really confident communicators and think, oh yeah, they can just get up and do this on the fly. But I bet they're the ones that always prep. They practice their talk and then they do their research ahead of important events. They just make it look so easy. So just to summarize those 5 tips, I think it's about being proactive in your communication. So finding ways, you know, to exercise that muscle, and instead of being just sitting there waiting for someone to notice, you know, you do need to push yourself forward a little bit. Look for allies, people that can support you, that can amplify your voice and try and amplify theirs in return. And try and lead by example. So if you're in some sort of work environment where there is negative communication, try not to get sucked into that. You know, try and counteract it with something positive, because you might find that other people follow you as well. Practice and prepare. So for anything, speaking in public, meetings, always do your research. You know, just make sure that you have got that solid prep behind you. And then lastly, stop telling yourself that you've got imposter syndrome, because you're great. You've got this, you're brilliant. So yeah, so they're all the things that I wanted to cover in the initial talk. And then perhaps if we could open it up for a discussion. What I'd love to chat about first is to hear from you about any challenges that you've got. And then perhaps after that, we could go to solutions. So either for people running businesses or anyone, you know, in a workplace environment.